As Greg mentioned, my name is Ed Gonzales. I'm a Microsoft MVP in the business application space with a focus on Power Automate. And the MVP really, and I like to remind people, doesn't mean I'm an expert because I'm not, right? Like I always have something to learn and there's always something out there, but it does mean that I contribute towards the community. And I do things like this, right? I speak at conferences and user groups and I blog and occasionally, since I started at EY, my blogs have kind of tanked. Like I think I've done 2 articles in the last 4 years. But I have a few podcasts out there. I've got one with fellow MVP Ashley Steiner called Awkward Silence, and that's a good one. And then I'm trying to do one like Azure McFarlane, who's another consultant at Hitachi. She is actually in this picture. That's Azure right there. In the bottom right. And we've got another one where we talk like kind of mental health and wellness for folks in the technology industry. And then I had another one with Angeliki Patsiavo, who she spoke at our user group some time ago on, user design or user experience, user interface type stuff. And then there was another one, and I can't remember, and somebody's going to hate me for forgetting it, and I'm sorry. But there's stuff out there that I'm doing for the community. So, and then also I was a super user for the community, but I think that kind of went away. So I'll probably pull that badge off of the thing. So this is me and some other people. So you Power BI guys probably, or Power BI people probably recognize these two folks. It's Patrick LeBlanc and help me out with the other one. Guys in the cube, right? So those guys. And I always forget his name and sorry. And then
Adam Saxton?
Adam Saxton, thank you.
Yes.
So these two guys, we were at MVP Summit, and I told them my story, right? Which I won't bore you with the details, but essentially, Power BI was kind of my gateway drug into the Power Platform, and because of the Power Platform, my career trajectory completely changed, right? Like I was working at this, I'll call it a dead end job, but I was grateful to have it at the time, but I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't doing anything with it. And I had kind of like reached the max that they were going to let me go to, like as far as promotability and things like they didn't know what to do with me because I'm all over the place in my brain and the things I like to do, and they didn't really have a space for me. And so because of the Power Platform, I was able to get into tech consulting full time, and so now I'm at a big four accounting firm, tech consulting firm, and really having the time of my life because I get to solve problems like full time. Like that's my job, and I think that's super cool. And so these pictures here. So this is one of my coworkers, Shobit. He's in New York. He's in New Jersey. And so when I went to a client site on New York, we got the chance to hang out. And this is my friend Jim. This is at the Microsoft office, I think, in San Jose. And then here are some other folks. So this is Daniel Laskowitz, who is on, Daniel and April both work at Microsoft in kind of the Power Platform space, doing stuff, cool things. And then that, as I mentioned, is Azure McFarlane. So that's a bit about me. Now we're going to talk about Power Automate. So I heard a couple of people mention, like in the warm-up bits before the call, and I'm going to try and keep an eye on the chat. So Greg, if there's anybody like throwing comments in the chat, just let me know because until I do the demo, I won't see it. But happy to answer.
You.
Thanks, dude.
Steve did mention he's all about Power Platform turned his career as Power BI was my turning of my career too. So I think you're in good company, sir.
Oh, that's awesome. That's good to hear. So I did hear that, a couple of people kind of like they dabble in Power Automate. So what I'll do is when we get to like the demo-y part, which is really going to be the majority of our conversation today, I will spend some time just on the navigation, like just moving around Power Automate and some of the things that I use regularly and some of the things that I kind of don't use regularly. But I'm always happy to go into more detail, and I think the group's kind of small enough that if there's something that other folks are into that they want to see, I like my demos, my presentations are very jazzy, right? So they're not a lot of structure. We'll build stuff on the fly. Things are going to go wrong. I think I have a couple of slides on, shifting how we learn Power Platform. because it's less about what I call the finished product. And hopefully, if I've got those slides, we'll talk about that, and more about the journey, right? More about the methodology in, how we design and solve things, right? So we'll talk about that. But right now, what is Power Automate, right? So it first came out, a while ago, and they called it Flow, and they said, hey, this thing it's a no-code tool for automation, and they were quickly checked, right? People are like, no, man, there's code here. I'm writing code right now. Look at me. This is code. And I mean, for those that are just starting out, don't sweat it, right? Like, yes, you can do code. There's room for that in there, but the majority, like if you're pretty cool in Excel and you can write a mean V lookup, right? Like you'll be okay. Like this, the expressions in Power Automate, while the syntax is a little bit different, like they work the same way as a lot of that stuff. So I don't want anybody who's new to kind of freak out and be like, oh my God, we're going to write code. You're not. So it's in there for pretty much everything that we do, there's a no code version way to do it. It's just sometimes it's easier to write these expressions than it is to like click on, windows and stuff like that. But that's, there's I guess the point is that there's room for everybody, right? And that's the intended audience ranging from business users to what I call the classically trained or artisanal developer, right? The folks that learned, in Visual Studio Basic or, whatever, and they're staring at code all day and they totally understand it. I can look at this stuff, right? I could probably deconstruct somebody else's code, but I couldn't write, 3 lines from scratch that did stuff, yet. But it happened. It could happen. The intent, though, is that it will help you automate those mundane tasks. And I use mundane in air quotes because if you think about the things that don't maybe necessarily require a lot of brain power, as far as like, there's, I drop 10 marbles in the machine and they come out in 11 different places. Like that's probably not a great candidate for automation because, your logic engine, if you will, isn't necessarily broken. And if there's a lot of subjective stuff around it, like it's not going to work great. But if you've got stuff that, kind of like comes in the same way every time and goes through the same kind of logic stuff, that's the cool stuff. Yes, you can absolutely get more, complex. But when you're first starting out, like stick with the simple things. Like my very first, like we'll call it my first production flow, right? Was I took emails and turned them into tickets inside Dynamics, right? So I would get emails from Amazon that said, hey, somebody left a 3-star or under review on one of your products. And I would want to hand that off to my customer service team so that they could, respond to the customer on Amazon and say, hey, really sorry about your crap experience. What can I do to help out? And then I'm miming typing on the keyboard as if everybody can see me. And then they would do that. And I would lose about a half hour every day doing this manually, right? And so when I figured out how to do this in what was then called Flow, you figure as a manager, that saved me, 2.5 hours every week that I can now be doing managery type stuff and not necessarily, doing these administrative tasks. And so that was kind of cool. Unfortunately, I was the only one that was really excited about that, right? But that's okay, right? Now look at me. Um, and the idea, what makes it so, if you've worked in Power Apps, like you kind of get a taste for this. If you've worked in Power BI, you also kind of get a taste in this. But what makes this so cool is that I can connect processes, or I can take a process to all of these different cloud services, right? So somebody out there, somebody smarter than me has taken these API endpoints, wrapped them around in a connector, and have made it, totally graphical user interface so that people like me can click on things and take emails from Outlook, which is a Microsoft product, and drop them in Dynamics, which is also a Microsoft product. But I could just as easily, and this is the part where I say, don't focus on the final product, focus on the methodology. But they could just as easily take emails from Gmail and drop it into Salesforce, right? The process is going to be the same. The methodology is going to be the same. And the connectors are pretty close to the same. Like they all kind of do the same kind of stuff, doing, depending on all the CRM connectors are going to have, the same types of triggers and actions. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we get going. Any questions so far, Greg? How are we doing on the chat? I feel like I'm talking a
We are
million
doing
miles an
good.
hour.
No, you're
Okay.
good.
Mhm.
You're stringing it along.
Cool. All right. So with regards to error handling, some of the things that we're going to talk about, right? And this is for the folks that identify as a developer, right? These are the things that are going to resonate with you, right? For folks that are not in the development space, the thing that we're going to be building is essentially what's called a try-catch finally. We're not going to do the finally, that's why it's grayed out, but it's a try-catch loop, or sorry, a try-catch I don't know, bucket. I don't know what the whatever the right is, but the try is like, hey, I'm gonna do the thing, like whatever your flow is, that's your try. Like I'm gonna, take my emails and turn them into trouble tickets in Dynamics, and then I'm gonna assign them. That's the try part. The catch is like, hey, what do I do if something goes wrong, right? And so that's the error handling part that like that's the reason Sarah's here. And then the finally is like, what do I do no matter what, right? If the thing works, if it doesn't work, what do I do? And so what I've kind of put together is just this thing that lets us put all of those concepts together into Power Automate. And I'll go into more detail like as we're building this stuff, but I just want to get us familiar with the words, right? And we're going to do this with a functionality that's built into Power Automate, which is configure run after. And that basically says, I'm going to run this step after the previous step succeeded or failed or skipped or timed out or whatever. And I'll show you that. And we'll talk about scopes and results, workflow, things like that, and formatting HTML tables. So that's all boring stuff, but we'll get into the demo. And this is where Mr. T says, do the demo, right? Do the thing. So here we are. We're going to jump right in. Okay, so let me pull this over. So first, quick intro. So I didn't have those slides where I talk about focusing on the ingredients, and they're two really cool slides, right? So one, it just picture, if you will, an image of a food recipe, because that's the analogy I use. I love food. Greg knows this. Um, and basically, if you remember those old cooking shows, right? Like they would pull something out and say, "Hey, this thing happens to already be done." But the analogy that I use is like if I was teaching people how to, cook chickpea butternut squash curry, right? If they didn't like chickpeas or butternut squash or just, curry, whatever, then maybe they don't pay attention, or maybe they don't come to my session, or maybe they don't, whatever. Like if I had a session back in the day, we would have a session that said how to take emails in Outlook and turn them into trouble tickets in Dynamics, right? Unless you had to do that specific thing, maybe you'd skip that session. Maybe you wouldn't come to this meetup if I had named it something so specific, right? But like you're like, oh, I don't use Outlook, I use Gmail, and I don't use Dynamics, I use Salesforce, so I'm going to skip this thing. But the methodology that we approach this thing with is exactly the same. So that's where I tell people, don't focus on the final dish, right? Focus on the ingredients, the garlic and the basil and the chickpeas and whatever, right? Because that's the stuff that's going to matter to you, and you can find, if we learn the flavor profiles of each of these, if we learn how to use these actions, how to troubleshoot, how to approach a problem and solve it, then we can take it back to our own respective kitchens and solve, or make a dish that is pleasing to our palate, right? So that's the methodology slides that I didn't include in this thing, but basically sets the stage for, what we're gonna do, right? So going back to, this screen, the Power Automate side, like if you're brand spanking new to this and you haven't really seen this before, oh, you know what? So if you go to make.powerautomate.com, that's what it would look like. And real quick, I'm just going to pull up another window because I remembered. So I was showing you guys like my work EY one, and we've got some things turned off. So I want to make sure that I show you this is what it looks like. Sure, this is what it looks like, to everybody else. That's interesting. I haven't seen that before. Yeah, let's do this because nothing's coming in on my phone.
Of course, when you've got a demo.
Yeah, that happens.
Yeah.
But you
You're
can now everybody,
secure.
yeah, everybody knows my password is a bunch of dots now. Sorry. 32. It doesn't help if I mumble the MFA code, right? Like, all right. So, what I'm doing is I'm bouncing over to my personal tenant, and I'm not going to worry about this, so that you can see all the Copilot whiz bangy stuff. So over here in EY, this is all shut down. Like we don't want Copilot stuff yet, right? And there's reasons for that. Like we actually have our own in-house thing. Greg and I talked about this, but like out in the wild world, like before the admins start to lock things down, this is what the home screen looks like, right? And now I'm going to talk about this, but not right now. I'll talk about it in a little bit because there's some cool stuff with it. But just know that I liken it, like many of the new features in Power Automate, to a toddler, where like it's really cool if it's really fun and has a cute little giggle and everything when you're there watching it. But if you look away long enough, like it's just going to destroy your whole world, right? And could cause some problems. So, or just make a mess of things. Like that's probably more fair and nicer. Um, so it's getting better and it's doing some cool stuff and it's being more predictable. But for right now, like when we get to this stuff, just know that your mileage may vary. Okay, so in Power Automate, this is like your main kind of screen. You've got your environments up here. Hopefully everybody's kind of familiar with that. If you're not, raise your hand or drop something in the chat. I'll go into more detail. It's totally cool. You're safe here. I want everybody to have their things answered. But that's kind of a little bit of a larger conversation here. I'm going to bring this over here so I can eyeball the chat too while we're going. Okay. And so along the left rail is kind of like where all the fun is, right? So there's home, create, templates. If you're new to Power Automate, like this is a good place to kind of see what's going on. Like these are some popular things. Like if you can think of it, probably somebody else has thought of it. They made a template for it. So chances are you could probably find a template that does what you want it to do. They grouped them based off of like different things. The only downside to templates that I kind of talk about that I'm not crazy about is like in this example, like, right, they've got save your email attachments from Outlook.com to Dropbox, right? Well, like, okay, maybe I don't want to save my attachments to Dropbox, going back to my ingredients conversation. Maybe I want to save them to like my Google Drive, right? Well, but in order for me to see how this template is doing its thing, it wants me to right away log into Outlook.com and log into Dropbox, which is kind of a drag. Like I'd rather let me look under the hood, let me see how this thing is working, and then I can switch that Dropbox guy over to Google Drive or whatever, right? The other thing that's probably worth pointing out is that when we start talking about connectors in a moment, I'll note that for all of like the Outlook.com and OneDrive stuff, like there are two different versions, one for your Office 365, which is your work stuff, and then one for your personal, which in this case the Outlook.com thing, right, is like the Hotmail 2.0 type thing. Okay, so that's templates. Learn is just opens up the learn.microsoft.com with a kind of like a curated journey on learning Power Automate and all the cool things you could do. Absolutely recommend this if you're like a more of a self-paced learning type person. There's also a ton of YouTube videos out there that are great. My flows will show you all of the stuff that you built, right? And if you're lucky, you'll get a cool API request failed error. I am one of those lucky people, so I'm not necessarily worried about what's going on there. Switch over to that and see if that makes things cool. Let's see. Yep, there we go. So it just didn't like the environment that I was in, and that's fine. But you'll see all of your cloud flows here. Now, if you built a flow and you swear to God that I built this flow and you don't see it here, first thing to check is make sure you're in the right environment, right? Think of environments like neighborhoods and so maybe you built this thing in a different environment or a different neighborhood, and that's why you can't find your house because you're just in the wrong neighborhood. And so check the environment. And if it's not, if you're like, I'm in the right neighborhood, my house was right here. I swear I put it there. Check over here in the shared with me. Because the minute I grab this flow, like whatever it is, and I share it with somebody, it may or may not show up in here. They told me that it'll show up in here now, but I haven't tested it. So it may be in the shared with me stuff, right? And so here we go is one of my favorite demo flows. Get a random Chuck Norris fact. Okay, so we talked about templates. We talked about my flows. We're probably going to skip over a lot of the stuff down here. I will tell you that connectors is where I spend some time. Like when I have a cool idea about can I build this flow, I'll often start at this connectors area because this lists all of the connectors that are available to me. And so that'll tell me how easy this thing is going to be. If there's no connector for the thing, so like as an example, what was the one I was doing today? So um, there's a cloud-based thing called Slide Room, right? And there's no connector for it. I'm searching in the wrong area. Here we go. So Slide Room, yeah. So there's no connector for it. It's kind of like I don't know what the equivalent of it, but let me do like a Miro, Miro. So like you can see there's a connector for this, but it's got this little red square with the two people. That means it's independently published, which means somebody said, hey, this thing exists out in the world, but the good folks at Miro haven't put together a connector, and Microsoft hasn't put together like a first party connector. So I'm going to put together a connector where they basically grab all the API information and package it up and say, here's a connector, right? You'll see this a lot. What's another common one? Jira. So Jira has a first party connector, but the search functionality in it isn't great. And so somebody came up with, they did a independently published Jira, search connectors. So that's all it does, and it does that. But the short version to that whole part of this conversation is this is where you would come to see like, can I do something inside Salesforce, right? So I do a search for Salesforce. Here's the Salesforce connector. I'm going to click on it, and then it'll take me to like the Salesforce page, and I'll see like all the triggers that are associated with it, and then all the templates that might include Salesforce. So hey, maybe I found the thing that I want to do. If I don't necessarily see what I'm looking for there, I go see documentation, and then I get this kind of gross page. And apologies for the resolution. I'm in a hotel in Iowa. And so I'm working off of like a travel monitor. But you'll get all this gross stuff, right? That like, it's just a bunch of words. I don't know what any of this means. But the thing that I'm interested in down here is, and this is consistent, no matter what connector you pick over here on the left side, it's going to have, definitely actions, most likely triggers, right? But some connectors just don't have triggers. And so, you can see, will Salesforce, trigger when a new opportunity is created? Well, yes, it will. So I can see that right there. So that answers that question of, can I build this thing? Okay. So that is, I packaged up a 1 hour intro to Power Automate, which is really like a Power Automate in a day. So there's an 8 hour class that I squished into 4 hours, and I squished that 4 hours even further into 1 hour. That's kind of what you got in that. How long was that, Greg? 20, 30 minutes. So that was just a primer to get started on like the error handling part. Okay.
Oh,
Party.
efficient.
All right. I know.
Efficient.
Well, because I don't know where everybody's at, right? So I'm trying to get like a baseline. And like I
How about
said,
should we do like a quick pause? I mean, I would love to hear from the audience.
Yeah.
Those that
Let's
have
see if there are
joined.
any questions.
Yeah, questions. I mean, is there any thoughts running through your head that we want to bring up to Ed as we're getting to this point?
Don't be shy. Nobody's going to hurt
Don't
my
be
feelings.
shy.
Yeah.
Right.
And like I said, this is a totally safe space. Like I don't mind going over stuff, going into more detail. I want to make it relevant for, everybody, right? So that they retain it. If you do come up with something, raise your hand in Teams or drop something in the chat or whatever. Like any of that's fine, right? But let's get into error handling then. And then if something pops up, let me know. And so for that, I think I'm going to pop over back over. Oh, you know what? I didn't even talk about the AI stuff. Okay, so like it's 7:41 my time, so 5:41. I'll give you a 4 minute like kind of quick spiel. There's this thing built into Power Automate where you can pretty much describe what you want to do, and it gives you some hints, and it'll take a swing at like trying to build whatever it is you're trying to do. It's pretty amazing. It works. It works pretty okay, right? It's that toddler thing. The other, so it gives you some examples like try this, right? Like every month, copy all the files from OneDrive folder to another OneDrive folder. That's boring. When a new item is created in SharePoint, send me an email. Okay, that's kind of okay. And then copy all rows from an Excel file. I don't even do that. But if I click in here, it gives me other stuff, right? So here's another one. Based on the form response, send with some conditions, send various emails. So I'm just going to click on that and see what happens. It's going to, do the thing and then pop out with like, hey, this is what I think you're trying to do, right? How does that look? So here I've got my trigger when a new response is submitted. Get the form details, which I know as a Power Automate professional, that's required. And then I've got a series of conditions, which it has no idea what I want to do. And it's even nested some of them so that you can figure out, oh, I can have multiple layers of that condition. And then finally we get to the send email and you're like, oh, you know what, that's pretty close. I'm going to click next. And then it, basically builds the thing, right? So that's, the Copilot version. The other place to get to that is, if you click on create, there's, all the different flows here. I'll give you an insider tip in a second, but the one you're looking for that is the describe it to design it. The insider tip for me is I focus on these three, right? Automated, which is like when something happens over here, go do something over there, right? When I get an email in Outlook, Office 365 Outlook, go do something in Dynamics, right? That's the automated stuff. Instant is I'm pushing a button. I have to push a virtual button that says, go do this thing, go kick it off somehow, right? And scheduled is exactly as it sounds. Do this every other Tuesday at 7 a.m. or do this, every 5 seconds for the next 5 minutes, that kind of thing. That's a scheduled. But the insider tip is it doesn't matter which one you click on. Like I always click skip, but basically whatever you click on is going to bring up a relevant kind of wizard that's going to kind of walk you through this stuff. But I just click on skip and go right to my little maker canvas. Okay. Now, again, because I'm in my personal tenant and I have not turned off Copilot, I can use Copilot to build my flow step by step, right? That's not the topic of today's conversation. So I'm actually going to pop over to the work tenant and we're going to just do a create thing over there. Okay. And again, I'm just going to click on something. Doesn't matter what I click on because I'm just going to come over here and go skip. And then that'll take me right to the maker canvas. Now, because Greg, are you recording this? You are recording this. I see.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to tell us your credit card information, social
No.
security? No.
I do not. Yeah, but I see the record button up at the top left. What I was going to say is because we're recording this, I'm going to try and do as much as I can in the new designer, right? So the new designer looks like this. It's really cool for when you're building really big flows, but this is another one of those toddler instances. It's one of those things where it's being built out. They're doing a great job, but sometimes it doesn't necessarily do the things you expect it to do the way you expect it to do it. And when you're brand spanking new at this, we don't know, like, did I screw this up or is this the new designer just being weird, right? So I've been telling people, just pop over to the classic for now. And the reason I've been saying that too is because a lot of the YouTube content out there, like if you pop over to my blog, right? Like if you start looking at the screenshots, it's all the classic designer. And so I might do some of this stuff in the classic designer just so you can see what that looks like. But this is what the new designer looks like. You know what? For now, yeah, I'm just going to pop it over to the classic, and you do that by just clicking this little toggle. That's it. That's all there is to it, right? And so I can click it back to the new designer at any point. Just make sure that if you're going to bop back and forth between the two, save your stuff first, because when you do this, you notice like it didn't save anything, Okay. So for this particular flow, because our focus is not at all the flow itself, right? It's the stuff that happens when things go sideways. I'm just going to do a manual trigger. Like I'm going to come in here, I'm going to push some virtual button that says, okay, go, right? And then what I want to do, and this isn't like anything super important, like so you don't have to memorize this part, but basically I need to do something that kicks off an error, right? So that way I know, um, I'm going to kick off whatever my error handling thing is that brought everybody here. I need to, be able to generate kind of consistently. So what I've been using in my demos is just doing like a divide by zero, right? So what I did is I used a compose action, and compose is just like a box. I can put in free text if I want, like it just, put in text. I sometimes like at the top of my flow, I'll put release notes, up here. So I'll be 2024, 10, 8, and then I'll put in like build my flow this, oh, I don't know why I'm all caps. Wow. Build my flow for the first time. And then maybe I'd come back in, 2 days later and and be like, changed this thing, right? And so that's kind of one way you can use compose. You can also in compose drop in just dynamic content. Like we're picking up stuff that had happened before, in previous steps. But in this case, I'm just going to drop an expression in there that is, a divide by zero. I'm going to take the number one divided by zero, and that's going to generate an error, and that's going to be the thing that you know is the reason why we're all here. Okay, so right now, if I save this thing and I run it, the only thing that's going to happen is it's going to, error out. It's going to say, this is gross. I don't like this. I've got some kind of an error. And then a week from now, as Sarah pointed out before we kind of started this thing, I'll get an email that says, hey, some of your flows might not be working great. You may want to check it out, right? With like, that's as useful as it gets, right? Um, and so that's not super awesome, right? Because one, we're not finding out right away. So we've got a production thing out there, like we don't find out until a week later. And so here you can see this is the error that I'm getting saying, hey, divide by zero, that's math, dude, you can't do that. And so it just errored out. And like I said, a week from now or a couple days, who knows? Like I don't know what the schedule is. I'll get something that said some of your flows have failed. And that's not great. So what we do is like, okay, so I come in here and I'm gonna say, you know what? I want you to send me an email. And so I'm gonna just choose Outlook, Office 365 Outlook, and I'm just gonna go send an email. And again, any of this stuff, I'll go into more details. I'm zipping through this stuff because I want to get to the part where we're actually doing error handling. Okay. And I'm just gonna have it send it to myself for now. Now keep in mind for actual error handling, um, you don't have to send an email. You can add, a row to a, table or something that says, hey, this error happened at this day, kind of a thing. So uh, broken flow. And then check your flow. It's broke. Okay. So right now, this step what's going to happen is I'm going to trigger the flow. It's going to error out, and then it's just going to stop. It's not going to do anything because the configure run after for this send an email step, the default for all of these configure run after is the thing successful. So this step is only going to run if the previous step was successful. Well, we know it's not going to be successful, right? So I just want to change that. Now, to show you how to get to that configure run after, right? You click on these three dots, the ellipsis there, and then you go to configure run after, and then I'm just going to change this instead of successful. I'm going to change it to has failed. So right now, what'll happen is I'm going to trigger the flow. It's going to error out. And then because this errored out, this guy says, well, I'm going to only run this step, the send an email step, if the previous step errored out, right? So let's test it out. I don't have my email up, so I'll have to, let me open up this guy while that's running. I'll just pull up. office and we'll look at that. And it normally goes a bit quicker, but I am in Iowa, and so maybe the ones and zeros aren't moving as fast as they should. No offense, Iowa. Okay, so this is because it's bringing this up because it's the first time I've used this connector in this environment. So I'm just basically saying, hey, you need to do the thing. And so it runs, I already got the email. So this thing ran, errored out, and then the email sent. And then let me pull this up. So here's the email that came over, right? Check your flow. It's super informative. Thanks, Ed. I mean, to Sarah's point, right? It came right away. So right there's a win, right? So that's fun. But let's obviously, what happens if, like, I come up here and now I've got this other step where, um, I'm going to go get the weather, and the location is going to be Portland, Oregon, right? And so now I've got this second step, and then it does the divide by zero error. And this configure run after is only going to run if my compose error, this step, fails. So what happens if this is the step that failed, right? Do I have to put this thing after that and then like just do a send an email step after everything that could possibly fail? Like that doesn't sound like fun. That's where scopes come in, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this thing, and it's called scope, right? And a scope is like a box or like a backpack or like whatever, right? And basically, a scope lets me put a bunch of actions in it. And so this is where I would put my whole flow, like whatever it is I'm doing. Like I've got my trigger, whatever that is, like when an email comes in, and then the rest of my flow would be inside this scope. And you'll notice that down here, my send an email step is it reverted back to the successful because I changed the previous step. The previous step is no longer this compose thing. The previous step to the send an email thing is this scope here. So if I want this email to send, if this scope errors out, I got to come back in to configure run after and see, you can see over here, send an email should run after scope has failed, right? Now, the cool thing about scope is I can put a ton of actions in here, right? If any of the actions fail, the whole scope fails. So now that means that if I've got 15 steps in here and one of them fails, this scope now fails, and so that's going to trigger this email, right? So we'll see that in action now. I'll kick it off. Pull up Teams real quick. On the flow. Okay. So now in this example, you can see my scope has the little red exclamation mark because the scope didn't do well. But I can see one of my actions worked, right? Like it got the weather for Portland, Oregon, um, right? Mostly cloudy. That doesn't sound at all like Portland, Oregon. And then I've got the error that failed, and because that one step failed, let me scroll up here. So because that one step failed inside the scope failed, and it sent that email, right? So that's cool. And so what this is essentially, right? This is our try block, right? Oops, that's not what I meant to do. I read something that said I can move this. Yeah, there we go. Okay. That would be for the, you can't see it, but I had to move the little share thing. Um, okay, so I can rename this scope to try, and then this would be essentially my catch in this instance. But in the blog article, so I'm going to drop this in the chat just because I don't know how much time we've got, and I want to make sure everybody's got the details, because in that blog article, what I do is I walk through essentially adding aspects from the error into that email, right, Sarah? So you can see the action that failed. You can see why what was the specific error. And then I've even included a hyperlink that will take you right to the version or the run that errored out. And all this happens instantaneously, right? Now, because I'm grouping things together and I'm doing a bunch of stuff, right? Then instead of just having, single actions like this, then I'll do the same thing with all of that error handling stuff. And I'll just create another scope and I'll bring this in there. So like this is my send an email, and then maybe I've got my format, hyperlink, whatever stuff in there. And notice that my arrow changed back to black. So I'm going to go to this scope now. First, I'll rename it so it makes sense. I'm going to call that my catch. And then I'm going to click on the ellipse again and go to configure run after. And notice that it says catch should run after your try. This failed. And so now everything in this scope, whatever I put in this scope, is only going to run if something in this try cat or try block has failed, right? Now, I know you're thinking, what else could you possibly put in there besides sending the email? So I'm going to pop over to the one that I already have done, right? Just so you can see what I'm doing. And this is all in the blog article, so I'm not going to go into a ton of details in it, right? But the first thing that I'm doing is I'm just kind of storing this preamble part. And the only reason I do this is because I put this stuff in both normal clients, right? Which is, like normal cloud stuff. And then I also will do it in some government stuff. And the URL for government is different. It's like a, make.us.powerautomate. It's not the same as what we're used to. And so I just put it in here so that I can easily change it whenever I implement. And I'll show you why that's cool in a moment. Okay. Um, so then I look at the results of that error and I say, just show me the stuff that failed, right? And that's that filter array step. And I know this is a lot, but that's why I gave you the link for the blog article. So it kind of steps through it a little bit more. This just gives me the pieces that I'm interested in. So the name of the action that errored out, the reason, which in this case is going to be invalid template, maybe not super useful, right? And then the actual error message, which is this piece right here. Okay. And then I create the HTML table using that stuff. And that's just going to give me this cool little block here, except if you just do it like that, it's ugly. There's no padding. There's no like lines really. It's just kind of like all squished together. And so that's what this other step here does. And this is thanks to an article from April Dunham, who was, in that picture. She's got a really nice article on formatting HTML tables inside Power Automate. And then we do some other stuff, like we get the details of that run that gives us this, the hyperlink stuff. We build that URL, and then we finally just drop all of that stuff in an email, right? And we send that all out. And there's some fun stuff there that I detail out in the blog. And then finally, what I do is I make sure I terminate this as failed, because with the try catch stuff, right? So if I were to look at the past runs of this flow, it will think they're all successful because it did exactly what I told it to, right? I said, hey, if this thing bombs out, do this, right? Send that email. So Flow's thinking, I'm a hero. I did exactly what I was supposed to. So this is a win. And so if I come down to the past runs, I should see, yeah, succeeded, even though you and I both know that succeeded means that it failed, right? This one failed because that was the very first one that I showed before I had the email set up stuff, right? So I mean, that's kind of like the main part of that. Um, I'm trying to go into the right level of detail. So if you've got questions on like, hey, can you dig in more into this or less into that, let me know. Oh, here's why the the block stuff, the scope stuff is really cool. Okay, this is my error handling block right here, right? This is my catch that essentially I built out that has all of that stuff, right? All of those things where it gets the error information and it gets, you know, all of the specifics of the run and it builds the hyperlink and it sends out this cool email and does all this stuff, right? Do I really want to build that every time I build the flow? Probably not. Now let me come over to the little one that I built over here, right? And I'm gonna switch back to the old designer just so I can move a little bit faster. I'm gonna move my little screen share toolbox up here. So I'm gonna get rid of this real quick. So I built my flow, whatever it is. In this case, it's get the forecast for today and then you know, do some stuff and then error out, right? Well, if I come over here to, we'll just call it, you know, my master one, and I grab this catch block and I go copy to my clipboard. Then I come over to this flow, new step from my clipboard, boom. Now, because all of my expressions in this piece down here reference not the individual steps, but the try block. As long as I've renamed this scope action to try, all of this stuff downstream is still going to work. The only thing I need to do is go back and change my configure run after so that all of this stuff only works if this something in the try block failed, right? So remember, this is the one I built on the fly. This is the one that, you know, you and I built together. I added the weather and then I had the thing that bombed intentionally. And then all I did was copy this block from that I, you know, spent, I don't know, an hour or so fine tuning and building or whatever. But now all I got to do is just copy and paste it. And as long as I've named this previous scope to try, all of this stuff should work. So if I come over here and I, you know, just test it again, right? Because everybody here has seen that, you know, my previous examples, oops, sorry, my previous example, poop, that share button got in the way and I clicked on stop sharing instead of like minimize.
That always
Okay.
happens.
I know.
Oh, and we actually have a question too, by the way. So I don't know
Yeah,
if it's.
I saw that.
You tell me at one point.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I'll get to it. So we saw the emails, right? So let me go to my emails and we saw that they were super boring, right? It was like, check your flow, it's broke, right? So here's the email, done, right? And then here's the next phase of the email that I built just by copying and pasting. Angels singing, right? So now I've got, here's the flow. I can drop the name of the flow in there if I want to. Up here, I put the environment, right? And then the name of the flow and the subject of the email. And then I've got this hyperlink that if I click on it, fingers crossed, it should take me in a brand new browser right to the run that bombed out. And so here you can see it took me super like straight to the run that bombed out. So I can come in here and start troubleshooting and say, okay, what went sideways? So really, if you take the time to read, you know, read the article, get the specifics and do all that stuff and build it so that everything is referencing this, you know, this scope called try, then from then on, you just copy, paste, copy, paste. Every flow that you build should have error handling and it should be super easy. Okay. Now, let me pop over to Pranam's question real quick. Can we possibly send the error message to Copilot or Azure OpenAI to analyze and provide steps to resolve this error in email, as the error messages are not always helpful? So, excellent question. Possibly, yeah. Like, why not? Okay. So, so let's take a look and let's have some fun. We're going to do this on the fly. While I'm kind of thinking through that, if anybody's got any other questions about what because I mean, that's error handling, right? In a like super fast, scrunched up version. That's kind of what that looks like. I didn't go into like a ton of detail of like all the expressions and stuff because it's in the blog article. And everybody kind of learns different ways. And so maybe that's best. What if we call the Copilot flow and that flow fails in turn? So, Brent, I'm not totally understanding the question when you say if we call the Copilot flow. Are you talking about in reference to Pranam's question?
Yeah. So if we were to call the Copilot flow to try to get help, what would happen if that flow in turn failed?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So, well, one, if I built a separate flow, so let me do Brent's question first, right? So, like, let's say something in my catch block errors out because that's kind of like the crux of the question. What happens then, right? That's totally up to you. Like, you'll notice that most of the stuff that I've got in my catch block is pretty simple stuff that is essentially just text manipulation and extraction of data. There's a possibility that this stuff would error out, but unless I build error handling for my error handling, like it's just going to error out. And that in that case, the actual flow would error out because it didn't complete as expected. And then that would get I would get the normal kind of Microsoft email to that, right? Now you could build in like a dead man switch or something like that that basically says, hey, if my like if I got a flow that runs every day, and at the end of that day I expect, either a pass or fail, and at the end of the day I don't have either, then let's kick off a notification. So there's some weird stuff you can do there. But Pranam, to answer your question, and hopefully I'm saying your name right. Like I would come in here somewhere, right? And you can add an action for like a chat GPT. There is a connector for that. And essentially what I would do is write the prompt to say something like you are a Power Platform developer and you are working in Power Automate with maybe this action referencing the information that you get from referencing that compose action, and I get the following error, and I post in whatever text block is here as a dynamic value in that prompt, and then how could I fix this? And then what you would do is down in your email step, so let me close that. Down in your send an email step, you would just include a block that says, Chat GPT recommends, and I'm probably not spelling this right, the following solution. And then you would add the dynamic value, which would be the output of your Chat GPT, your OpenAI step, right? So, and okay, so why don't you want to recreate this, Pranav? So
you don't want to build it all over again?
I know, that's how we learn. So here's a fun story. So short version, no, it's not available as a template because everybody's kind of use case is different, and the templates that are out there are like full complete flows, right? And so I mean, that's not a terrible idea. Like, here's a template that's just a manual trigger, something that is guaranteed to error out, and then the catch block, right? The interesting story is, if I asked the product team, because as a Microsoft MVP, I have access to the product team, and I basically said, hey, give me the wording that a user could drop in here that would essentially recreate this block here. Like, let me have a script or something that I could share, and then that way people could come in here, hit Control V, and then build the thing, and it would do this, right? I tried it myself, and where I got stuck was this: add a scope. Like it didn't know how to deal with that. It just completely, yeah. Like I had it like I even had a trigger, so let me just add a manual trigger for fun, right? Where is it? My resolution isn't making it not fun for me. This is why I don't like the new interface. All right, I'm just going to choose a silly trigger, right? So there's that. Cool. Yeah, make me do stuff. Oh, for crying out loud. Add manual trigger. Let's see if that works. There we go. Okay, so there's my manual trigger. Yay, something worked. Okay, so now I would say after the trigger, add a scope action. And this is where it bombed out. Like it didn't know how to cope with this. So I said, okay, what's the right wording? So now they fixed that part. And so now I guess what I could do is start figuring out what does, let's see, rename the scope to try. Let's see if it does that. Nah, doesn't like it. Okay. But what I could do is spend some time figuring out what prompts would essentially generate that and basically make a series or a script or something like that people could just come in and paste into Copilot. The other option that I could probably do is like all of this stuff, all of Power Automate stuff is stored as JSON, right? So I could probably, find a way to create this as a solution and just make it available. But I do like your idea of doing a template like that seems like something people can do. So what I did in my blog article is like, I mean, I didn't invent any of these ways. What I did was I aggregated, my ideas. Matthew Devaney is an excellent consultant out of Hitachi, and he's got some stuff that he did that I brought into this. I told you April Dunham, like I brought some of her stuff in, and I just kind of like brought all of these really cool ideas and put them into one single place so that, we end up with that really cool output of just this thing. And then that's when I kind of said, well, hey, if we just standardize our naming conventions, now we can just copy paste, copy paste, copy paste. And I learned that, the hard way after I built it 2 or 3 times. I'm like, oh wait, I forgot I can do this, right? And I had like, another 40 flows that I had to add this to. So I don't know. I mean, that's kind of it, right? I know we covered a lot of ground. So like I said, hopefully don't set an expectation that you walked out of here with like as an expert in this stuff. Like this is some complex stuff, and takes a bit of getting used to, but take some time and just kind of digest this article, try some of this stuff out. If you bump into trouble, don't, hit up the community, reach out to me, whatever you want to do. Like I'm always happy to help. But I feel like this article goes into like the right level of detail that you should be able to kind of like do this, and try it out and then try pasting it into other flows.
Thank you, Ed, for presenting on such an awesome topic.
Oh, thank you. Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. See you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.